Hello and welcome to the Business of Betting podcast. Today I'm joined by John from Poison Foot. John, thank you very much for coming on.
This podcast is proudly sponsored by Betfair Australia. No matter where you are in the world, if you're looking to find your edge in sports betting or racing, you'll need to visit the Betfair Hub. From analysis to betting psychology, it has everything that you need. Simply visit betfair.com.au/hub.
Today I'm joined by John from Poison Foot. John, thank you very much for coming on.
No, thank you, Jake. It's a privilege to be on this podcast.
No, I'm looking forward to it. Math and trading and betting and all the other stuff that comes with that is going to be exciting to talk about today. Why don't you tell us, how does someone with your background, which we'll get into, want to get into betting, or why does things for you anyway point towards betting rather than some of the stuff you've done in the past with Forex trading and things like that?
I think it all comes down to competition and numbers. You know, having studied math, you're always involved. You always hear about the oddball, who does trading on the side and applies some type of model. And I think it just goes hand in hand with gambling, casinos, the excitement of it, the adrenaline you get from it. And it's something that, you hear time and time over, people with numbers excel in. Of course, there's a big crowd that does very well that not necessarily applies mathematics or statistics into their gambling or their betting or their trading. But in short, it was just, always been into sports, been watching football since I was small. So it just naturally just all came together and took it from there.
So tell us a little bit more about your background. I think math degree as well as some relevant experience in the financial world. Just briefly run through that for us.
Yeah, so I started a math degree, and I just focused on the pure math aspect of it. And I just made sure to take as many math classes as I could and as abstract as I could. So that was a little bit of I never really took much statistics. I just focused on the pure math. And I left after taking a couple of graduate classes. I left to work at banking. I didn't want to be broke always. So I went into FX trading. And that really opened up a whole new world because, in mathematics, it's just you, your coworkers, your teachers. It's all very calm. It's all very, you take your time. And then suddenly you go into this world where it's, you shift from first gear into fifth gear. And it's brutal, day to day. It's very exciting. It's very motivating. And the biggest takeaways, obviously you have a lot of numbers and models and things that people do, but the biggest takeaway in FX trading, more so in that, was just the whole risk management aspect of it, the holding back. My manager was very keen on us having always a reason on why we entered a trade, why we exit a trade. So you start working with that mentality and always separate yourself from the money. When you start working with big amounts of money, it all just becomes sort of like, it's just digital currency. You don't really worry if you're trading $10 million or $50 million or $100 million. So you learn to separate yourself from that emotion, be very cold. And yeah, if you lose money, no one scolds you. As long as you have a good reason of why you went to that trade, why you exit, why you lost money. And if you win money, no one congratulates you. So it's very professional. And those were the key takeaways I took from FX trading. But yeah, as being young, I wanted more excitement. I wanted more speed. I wanted something faster. Algorithmic trading was the new big thing. So I wanted to get into that. And I just didn't have the programming skills because I just took pure abstract mathematics. So yeah, I left banking and just pursued a computer engineering job, looking to get into trading from home. But I ended up working at a private branch of the university doing biostatistics, and yeah, that's where statistics got involved into all this game.
So back in your trading days, it sounds like everything was ingrained in you that it must be process driven. Don't worry about the results. Don't focus on the results. It's all about the process and getting to that, and that sounds like it'll take care of itself. Is that fair to say? And has that carried forward into what you're doing more so today?
Yeah, definitely. They didn't worry too much about you making, a ton of money at the beginning or a ton of money. It's consistency, it's discipline, it's acting sort of like a robot, being very cold. So when you have numbers to back that up, you have even if it's, simple numbers, the typical technical analysis, you draw a channel and you say, hey, if the price goes below this point, I'm out. If it goes above this point, I take my profit, and sticking to that. And the good thing about working in the bank and with risk management, you always have people on top of you. You always have people asking you. You're always conversing. You're always following your rules. Breaking the rules is very hard. So, I mean, you can never break the rules because you get in a lot of trouble. So that definitely did help me later on when I started betting. I already had that mentality ingrained in me. So I didn't go forward and place, 1,000 whatever euros on a bet or go crazy and lose a ton of money. It was more like, all right, this is how I used to do it, and this is how I want to do it. So it definitely helped a lot.
When back in those days, do they train you on those types of things in being robotic and cold, or is it just systems set up? Because even the most naturally stoic person, probably even in the trading world with their bosses and their colleagues watching over, have the urge and have the sense to maybe double down on things or bet bigger or push a little bit more than they should. Is it still something that's relevant in that world, or is it truly systematically taken out of every individual?
In my experience, they started me slow. The amounts were reduced. I couldn't go ahead and place a big trade. So you work yourself up. You start I don't know how to say it. You start just separating yourself from the money. At the beginning, you look at $100,000 and you're just you're shocked and you're scared. It goes up a little bit. You make a bit of money and you don't know what to do. But later on, next thing you know, 3 months into it, you're into $1 million. Then you're into $10 million, 20 million, and it goes on. And it's a process, it's experience. These type of jobs, some of the FX traders, they had no degree. They were just old school. When it all started in the 80s and the 90s, they just did good, learned a lot, always learned from their mentors. And yeah, it's definitely a very experience based thing. Obviously, you always have that day where you lose a lot of money when you make a lot of money. But as long as you had that reason, as long as you had the some numbers to back you up, back your reason that you could explain, obviously, you wouldn't get into trouble. And at the contrary, if you're always getting scolded for something, you start getting a lot of fear. And if you always get congratulated for doing something, you start thinking, oh well, maybe I'm awesome at this. And then next thing you know, you place a big bet or a big trade, you lose a lot of money. So it was always very level-headed, little emotion. You do your job, you're an operator, and yeah, that's how it was in my experience. Obviously you hear about a lot of different banking and hedge. You go into hedge funds, it's a crazy world, but banking is a little bit more risk averse, and I wanted to join that not risk averse world, and just trade fast and use models and whatever.
So you have the math background, you've been trading for a while, you've had some experience in computer engineering. At what moment did you think, I want to leave all this behind me and maybe jump into the betting sphere?
Yeah, so when I started the computer and programming degree, I wanted to trade from home, and it must have been somewhere in that time. And I also started working as a biostatistician. Also, again, very calm. Shift back down to first gear. Very classical statistics. Use what's proven, use what has been used and tested and works. So it must have been in that time where I found out about sports trading. I never really was big into sport. I love football. I must have just signed up to a website and seen this world, prices, odds, they fluctuate, they move, there's a market, and I was just taken aback. So I didn't really look into the books or your typical read the classic gambling books. I just went straight into the academic papers. I was like, is there academic journals or papers or models that you can use with football? And right away it's just tons and tons of articles, and I just started reading them, and at the same time I was learning programming. So I was like, hey, I learned this tool in programming class. I'm going to apply it to this model that I just read about. I'm going to try to program it, and then from there on, start data mining, scraping, just building big backends, and yeah, from there it just took off.
How long did it take for you to get comfortable? Or was there a moment when you thought, you know what, I can maybe beat this, or I can win doing these types of things? Or have you still got some time to go before you get to that moment? Take us through that mentality approach.
Yeah, so what I started doing, well, at the beginning, when I was, obviously there's so much literature online, so I started looking into that, and I started noticing a big discrepancy between, descriptive statistics and predictive modeling. Descriptive statistic is your typical, looking at the past. 90% of the time, this team scores over 2.5 goals. Whereas predictive modeling, you take an assumption, you take a model, and it's like a recipe. You choose a couple of variables, you make a couple of assumptions. If you make too many assumptions, your model's too complex, too hard to program, computationally expensive. Might take weeks to update. But if you make too little assumptions, you get way too much of a simple model. It doesn't fit what you're looking at. So, it was a balance just working out. There's a lot of very powerful techniques that are very simple. For example, regressions and your typical statistical models that are out there. So what I focused on, just by watching also a lot of football, was trying to exploit events type patterns that keep repeating in football matches, avoiding the big leagues, not so much because a team like Barcelona or the big top 5 teams, they're very consistent. Very rarely do they lose or draw. To find those rare events, it's hard to model. So I just looked at I like going down to the second, third leagues where you start seeing patterns emerge, which disappear quickly. They come as fast as it goes. So I started looking at those events, and I started using techniques that we would use in FX trading. Simple things, sort of like correlation matrices. If you have for example, if an event A happens, in 2 more days, event B will happen. There's just a lag between 2 events that are correlated, and then once the fundamentals change, that correlation disappears. So I started looking at, hey, if this happens and then this happens, most of the time, a third event happens. So I started looking at that, try to anticipate those, and apply this models, the programming, just automate it, and then backtest. Backtest I think is fundamental. You go back with your data, you run a simulated, loop throughout all your data using whatever model or whatever conditional events you're looking at, and just see if you would have made money or not. Switch around the data, right? You do a bit of a cross validation. You pick another season, maybe you mesh 2 different seasons, and you just try to see if it holds to it. And just back testing. A lot of time, I spent hours and hours programming this. So yeah, that definitely helps, and it gives you the confidence going forward, being like, hey, this system works, this system doesn't work, this system stopped working, but it's a daily thing. Yeah, it's the grind, what they call.
Absolutely. So you mentioned descriptive and predictive statistics. So just tell me, from your perspective, are they 2 completely separate buckets? Is there clear overlap? Is there a weird gray area in the middle? If we polled, 10 people like yourself, would there be some discrepancy on what people would assign to each category? Take us through how, obviously they're very important words and they're very relevant in this world. So just give us your perspective on those. Yeah,
so probability is where, math, it's very, it's the accuracy, it's the math, it's airtight, it doesn't fail. But once you jump into statistics, it becomes the art. And that's where you start getting the jargon like descriptive statistics, predictive statistics. You have a model that predicts things, sure, but it predicts using historical data. So why is descriptive statistics not useful for predicting the future? So these models are very powerful techniques that try to peek into the future. They become a function of your input. Whereas descriptive statistics, you're just trying to summarize your data set with one number, an average, or standard deviation, or the median, or the mode. So you lose a lot of data. You lose a lot of fineness by just sticking to descriptive statistics. When you move into predictive modeling, you start using these techniques that incorporate all the data. You can start using things like weighing, right? So you weigh more recent data more than older data, and you can input everything. If you use a percentage, 90% of the time this team scores over 2.5 goals. Well, what about the coach? What about the lineup? What about anything, the weather? What about the distance they have to travel? So in descriptive modeling, you have those numbers, but it's hard to put together as you can in a model. So, it's a bit of a gray area between the two things, what you can use. And there's so many people out there that use all sort of different techniques from simple to complex that, you're always going to hear a case of someone using a very simple method making tons of money, and you're always going to hear of someone using extremely complex methods making a ton of money. So again, statistics, it's where this becomes an art, in my opinion. So you have a bit of everything in the spectrum. But yeah, it's definitely not a sharp line down the middle saying you won't make money with this, you will make money with this. Not at all.
Do you value simplicity? Because I'm sure many people listening who don't do this type of thing might be interested in getting more involved in it, and they hear, all the data sets that are available, all the different approaches, all the techniques, all the complicated things. It sounds complicated to them. Do you think there is an important element to this that you need to maintain some simplicity when it comes to this? Or is it one of those things where there's so much going on, there's so many inputs, variables, approaches, and different elements that you need to learn that it's never going to be simple?
No, I value simplicity a lot. I like to look at the fundamentals. I obviously in Twitter, you look online and there's people using the expected goals where they use the angle at which they kick the ball. If he hit it from 5 meters, from 10 meters, if he hit it with his right leg or his left leg. In my opinion, the way I look at it, that's just too much noise. And the people that implement it, I'm sure, they do it very well. But right now it's just me. So it's a one-man team here. So I just try to keep it simple. I just don't look at that noise, because at the end of the day, it's 11 players on one team, 11 players on another team. Those players, 5 of them might have woken up a bit tired. 5 might just be on the spot on, hyper focused. The goalkeeper just having a terrible day. So that's where the randomness plays in. Like the 22 lives in there. Just you never know how their training is obviously very important. And that's where in the lower leagues that starts to dissipate a little bit. Some of these players have a second job. Yeah, and in that sense, simplicity I think is key. At least if you're doing it just by yourself, for example, to not lose track of the important things. There is a lot of data, but there's also computers, and computers, you can treat them as your employee. You can look at a computer and say, hey, find me this type of games. Once you start learning how to program, you start giving the computer instructions that you would to, for example, a betting buddy. You say, hey, let's find all the games that satisfy this condition. You can just go to a computer and tell it, hey, find me all the matches that did this, or find me this matches that did this and then did that. So you can start using them as your own employees and get them to work for you. And you just sit back and try to manage all this data, all this input, and make it come together and try to make it simple.
Yeah, that's an interesting way to think about it. So how do you go about embracing all of the randomness and the variance and other things that come with it that maybe you can't control? Or, we talked about process before. The process was perfect, but the result didn't go that way because of things that, like you said, these people may have second jobs. They may be getting up early to be an electrician or a plumber and then playing in the third division, whatever it might be. How have you gone about tackling that type of problem? Because obviously you're doing so many things to try and solve, the answers for betting on football or betting on cricket or tennis or whatever it might be. But ultimately there is an element to it that is purely and simply out of our control.
Definitely, that's why you wanna restrict your sample to what I said before, exploit events. So you want to find what I do is try to find something that conditions an event, right? So every time this happens, this happens. I think that simplifies the process a lot more. You can focus your model to that specific event. You can condition a search, right? You can That's your constraint. That's what you're looking for, and you move forward from there. If you try to predict all of the Premier League games, it's a very tough job. There's many different teams out there with a lot of different money allocated to each one. Coaches are changing, players are changing, they're getting transferred. But if you restrict that noise into something that's into a pattern that you start detecting, I think that really reduces the complexity of all of this. When you go into Twitter or any forum, it's just, I think there's just too much information, too much data, people looking at too many things when they could just be, take a step back, and watching football games is important because sometimes you watch a game and you start noticing, things that happen, why was there this upset? Or, every 10 days there's an upset with this team. So it's finding those patterns and limiting your data to useful things.
Take me back to you as a trader. If you today could go back to that person and talk to them, or maybe one of your colleagues that are still working in trading who are looking at getting involved in betting, what would you tell that type of person? Are there things that you wish you knew earlier? Are there things that you would have avoided, because it was just time waste and things like that? Or are there other elements that stand out to you?
Programming. I can't. That was one when I went into mathematics. I have a sibling who also studied math, and the advice was, whatever you do, go abstract, go applied, who cares? But learn programming. It's the future. And I just didn't care. I just wanted the craziest, most abstract geometry. And when I went into the bank, I just realized, I felt very empty-handed because we had all these data feeds, we had all this data coming in, and as a click trader, you're looking at the screens, you're processing all of this. But if you could only get a computer just to, run some small process, it would alleviate a lot of your daily work. And then you start noticing a pattern. You say, every time this thing happens, there's this movement or there's this opportunity. If you could just get a machine to tackle that, and you just sit back and try to analyze the data and look for other opportunities. So I definitely felt very constrained with that, and I would have told myself or a colleague, just jump into programming, and that would have also helped a lot. But when you're banking, you're doing a lot of different things. You're also, you're a market maker too. You're working with clients. So sometimes you just get so busy that you don't even have time to think what I could have done better, what I could have done. You just did what you did. But programming would have been an advice or recommendation for sure.
So tell me about the website, why you created it, the name. I'm guessing it's named after the French mathematician, but just take us through how that started and ultimately what was the aim or the intention for getting it up and running.
Yeah, definitely. It's obviously off after Poisson, or I don't know how you say it in French, but yeah, it was after that, and it's also because it's a cheap domain. Sometimes you look at you try to find a domain and it's thousands of dollars or whatever, and it's just not possible. So yeah, not the nicest name. You look that up, you go to the image section in Google, and it's just horrendous. So when I started seeing this discrepancy between descriptive and predictive statistics, it got me thinking, hey, there's definitely an opportunity here to offer something very different than what is out there. Everyone's looking at one thing. I know of people that are wanting to look at a certain thing, but they just don't have time. So this could be a nice project, and I could learn about web development. While I was programming, I was deep into C, C++, R, but I just had absolutely no idea how to run a server, how to run a web page. So what better than to do it with football? So it's impressive how much football betting helped me in the degree, because everything I was learning in class, I would apply it, and then I would come back to class, and I had already done 10 times more of what was asked in class because of this need to just build these models and learn programming. So I really wanted to learn about website building, and I just started just working piece by piece. I mean, if you went back 2 years ago when the website started, it was miserable, but little by little, you just go learning, putting things together. It's like one big puzzle, using APIs, not using APIs, how crazy can you get with a website? And that was my intention. My intention is just to offer something very different than what is out there.
Do you think it'll be a little bit of a playground for you, a bit of a developmental hub to try different things and see what works, what doesn't work, and what people find interesting? Or will it be pretty laser focused on what you're going to offer on there?
I'm always trying to build new type of features. I'm looking at, for example, a graph that tries to weigh in an upset and favorites. So a little graph that just tells you if there was an upset or there wasn't. So I do a bit of math behind that. I try to do a bit of combinatorics or anything. I try to put that up on the website. Make sure it doesn't use up all the resources of the server. So it's definitely a balance there. I do want to focus on the models. I'm always behind the scenes looking at my model, tweaking it, making sure that the parameters are well, that the data is clean, that it's not too buggy, But yeah, and as long as the model keeps working, the subscribers are happy, and people come back and tell me, hey, this is awesome, hey, this is not awesome. You get a bit of both worlds, but I always try to talk to them and tell them, hey, try to find patterns, try to use this as even if you don't know much about, the intricacies of the model, try to use it as a starting ground. What I think the website does very well is put a price on things. You don't find that much in other descriptive statistics websites. They tell you, hey, this team's going to score. Sure. But what's the price? If this team scores 90% of the time and you're getting odds of 1.01, what's the point? The whole point is finding value within that price. That's the whole point of the market. You have to find opportunities. So I try to always put a price on things. And once you have that price, once you have a number, you can go forward with that. I definitely want to focus on that and focus on also starting to involve the user into these models, take their input, take their view on things. So right now I just added a model where you can put your view on the difference of shots and target. We know that the more you shoot on target, the more likely a goal is going to happen. So I incorporated that into a model, and then you put your view on that. The home team's going to score more, shoot more, or the away team, and computes the models based on that, and it returns you odds. So you can just compare that to the bookies.
So I think you used the term click trading before. Is that something that you found to be useful purely on the betting side, and playing around with different bookmakers' websites, looking at the different odds and markets, and having that background and experience? Or is sports betting and betting on these types of outcomes and events something very different, and it's taken time to learn and understand how it works and go from there?
So click trading and at least in the banking, you have so many data feeds coming in with all different types of information. You have the Bloomberg platforms, so you can always go in there, hook up your own software, your own banking software, get that data, transform it, model it, mold it, whatever you want. With the betting websites, the big ones, it's hard to do that because they're always looking. They ban you immediately for that, or so it's execution is mostly done by click. As far as automation, I really don't. The strategy I use or my style is not so much trading. If this goes up a little bit, get out of my position. No, I just put a pre-match bet and that's it. I fire and forget. I try not to stress myself out in play. And it's nice, putting a bet in and watching the game. It's fun. At the end of the day, when you're trading FX products, you're trading currencies and just boring stuff. Here, you're trading a football game. So at the end of the day, you get to watch a football match, and it's more exciting. But I try not to lose time with what the model gives me. The model gives me something, I plug it in, and I forget it. I don't cash out. I don't try not to follow up too much with it. I just let it happen, because again, when you go back into back testing, how are you going to grab the odds of the in play, put that into your back test, and determine if the cash out is profitable or not? So when you're back testing, you have to act the same way you do with your back test, and there's only a limited amount of information you can get.
So when you're betting, do you look at the prices and try and decide if it's worth waiting, or if it's worth firing, or if it hits your number, that's the time to bet? Or tell us a little bit on the betting side if you do spend any time monitoring and doing those types of things.
Yeah, definitely. I'm always monitoring the price, trying to quantify things, looking at the odds from different bookmakers. So that's very important. Um, and yeah, sometimes you just you start seeing a bit of movement and you wait for it. Obviously, it's there's syndicates out there. There's big companies that do this, and they move lines, they move prices. Who knows how? But you can obviously mine this data and then look at it and try to determine if it's going to go up, it's going to go down. And you can use several tools. For example, what I do is you can grab news from different outlets: Italian, German news, French news. I don't speak those languages, but Google Translate does an excellent job translating it. You have APIs, you have different translating software. You grab that data, and you can just feed it into a program that does text sentiment. So it tells you if this sentence is positive, if this sentence is negative. You filter out some of the garbage in those news articles, and you can get it's not looking good for this team because the manager is thinking of leaving, and the club is facing financial trouble. So boom, right there, red alert. Maybe that's why the odds are going up, or maybe that's why the odds are going down. So yeah, I try to just feed myself with different information, and yeah, make sure by keeping it simple, I also don't look at a lot of noise that's going out with a match. So if there's a very extraordinary event, I try to avoid those matches. If there's a lot of financial trouble, if there's extremely bad weather, or if there's or a lot of extreme amount of injuries, I try to stay away from that. I forget about it. Even if the price looks amazing, I stay away from that, because that's when games become truly randoms and you get massive upsets, or you see the Twitter feeds, just everyone going, terrible day today.
So you mentioned earlier you look at low-level leagues. Can you talk us through your approach to how you factor in the market information, whether it is obviously the betting prices and things like that? Do you do it far less or not at all for those lower leagues because you think you might have a better handle, or do you do it a lot more in higher leagues, for example? Just take us through your approach when it comes to that.
Yeah, so lower leagues, there's less bookies, trying to jump on them. Obviously, I don't go too low. You can go up to fifth division, but then again, it's maybe going to be one bookie offering that. So somewhere in the middle, somewhere where there's still a lot of markets open, Asian handicaps, I think, are very useful. Yeah, so you get opening lines. Sometimes the opening odds are very wild, very different between each bookie, and you start, well, at least in my opinion, I start thinking, hey, maybe there's not some consensus of what's going on here. What does my model say? I look at different factors, and I say, this match looks very stable. The news articles are not saying anything extreme. It's not a insane derby. Everything looks very aligned. I just don't understand why this odd is so high. It's also a timing game. If you wait too long, the odds might move against you, or the odds might move in favor of you. You never know. So, obviously a bit of experience, look into it, and if everything lines up, you jump into it, and and fire and forget.
What do you think was the steepest learning curve for you? Was it the betting side of things? Was it even the analysis and the data, even though you had pretty good background and resume in that space? Was there one that stands out where you had to spend more time on?
Getting attracted into markets that have very high odds. So obviously, when you start out, you start looking at the over 0 goals market. You think, hey, I'm seeing something here. Every time this team does this, and it's 0-0, they have to score a game. It's natural. It's football. It's a sport. Everyone wants to score games. But then you start realizing that sometimes just there can be a million shots on target and just no goals, and the odds just look so attractive at minute 70, and then odds of whatever, they offer you odds of 3 for at least one goal to go in. You say, how can a goal not go in? So you actually look at the historic, or you look at your model, and the model's telling you, don't touch that market. The odds should be 5, and they're offering you 3, or the odds should be 10. And so you have to look back. You have to be cold. You have to work with what your back testing is telling you, with what the model is telling you, and just try to avoid those juicy markets. And in my opinion, I did that at the beginning, and I try to avoid that. And getting a grip of things. Sometimes you see a match, you're just watching on TV, you just want to bring out the app and just put some money into it. But that all counts at the end. Are you going to factor that random bet, that instinct bet into your model profitability? So what I do is I try to modularize everything. Everything has their own module and everything has their own price and cost. What is it costing me to have this model, to run it? What are my costs and what are my profits? The website, what are the costs and profits? I don't bring money from one area to another. My day job, what do I make? How much am I spending? Hey, I can just, if my model wasn't profitable, I'll just use some money from my day job to, put my bankroll up again. That's not fair. That's not looking at the long term, and you're not being fair to yourself. And that's something that you also learn in banking. You have risk management telling you every day, this is your position, this is how much you've lost, this is how much you've made. Yeah, I think that was like a bit of a learning curve, I guess.
How do you operate as a one-man team versus, previously in the trading environment with double, triple checks, managers above managers, and so on? Do you think it's conducive for you to be in a one-person team to be able to operate how you want to, or do you miss some of that process-driven checking and other things that come with a team environment?
Yeah, I mean, definitely by keeping it simple, it doesn't you avoid all those sometimes double and triple checks. What I'm doing is not also far extreme operation, whereas in banking you have a lot going on, so you need those double checks, you need those triple checks, you need feedback. In betting, I just try to watch the matches, the leagues that I follow as much as I can. Sometimes it's hard because they just don't stream it or show it, because it's a third division game, so it's hard to get that feed. But yeah, I don't know. I've never really worked with. I've also been involved in just very little time, less than 4 years. So I've only recently gotten into the whole thing of Twitter and talking to people online. But even that feels sometimes, I don't know. So some people are just very fast on picking up friends in Twitter and talking and building a business. And yeah, from the side of my friends, no one has absolute any interest in this. So yeah, I'm just, I try to keep it sane with the models, try to keep it simple and have, your rules and just operate. But yeah, I guess you do miss it. If you had a big team like that, that could be fun, I guess. But then who knows? Maybe that's more noise added to it.
So following on that last point you made, do you think it's useful to have friends outside of this world where you can go and talk about food or literature or travel or whatever else, as opposed to being 100% of the time focused on betting, either working wise or going with friends to watch games, and it's always centered around sports and betting and gambling and those things? Or do you think there's value in having other things that you can focus on?
Definitely. No, I have a very, I guess I get very obsessed with things very quickly. So if it's programming, if it's surfing, if it's boxing, if it's betting, I just want to try to be the best at that. So sometimes you do get stuck in this strut, in this in your modeling, in your programming, and there's other perspectives that you can gain from other people telling you, hey, look at this, look at that. Twitter, I've had some conversations in Twitter and definitely some eye-opening things. But yeah, I mean, of course, there's value in going out with friends and looking at other aspects of food and talking of something other than betting. But in my opinion, you also have to be very disciplined. You also have to try to get into as much as you can into this if you want to make money into it. So yeah, I guess it depends on everyone's personality. Some people just work very easy with other people. Some people have a hard time working with other people.
I want to ask more general questions for a few minutes before we close out, especially around the betting industry. And I'm guessing you probably talk to people. They ask you about what's the betting industry like, how are things going? Just generally, do you think things are in a good place? Do you think there's very much plenty of room for improvement, or what are your thoughts at this point?
Yeah, well, the betting industry, I think the new tools that you start seeing, machine learning, artificial intelligence, so different crossovers from different areas, I think is important. For example, right now I'm trying to jump back into what I studied in math, geometry, topology. which is very abstract, very different from anything to betting. But some of the ideas you read on these books, you can bring it back to betting, and yeah, as far as the industry goes, I think it's just ever evolving. There's more tools, there's more programming. It's always faster. The lines are always a lot more sharper. You're starting to see a bit of a disruption with the Bitcoin exchanges and peer-to-peer exchanges like the one that Betfair has. And I think it's just going to gravitate towards that direction, sort of like the FX markets. You have all these platforms; they're always offering less margins. So I think it's going in a positive direction. It's going to be more available to more people. I think there's going to be more legislation. It's going to stop being, I guess, in this dark area, which everyone feels a bit uncomfortable about it. And yeah, who knows? Maybe just follow the road of financial markets, I guess.
Yeah, well, and one other thing I noticed more recently, I don't know if you know about this, but the NFL does a thing called the Big Data Bowl, where they release some player tracking data for amateurs, I think, to just take a look at it. I believe it's a Kaggle competition, or they release it through a couple of methods so that people can play around with the data and build something, and then they have a scoreboard and it's a competition. And I believe the winners in the most recent one were two European guys. I think they live in Austria, who work in insurance, and they were talking about it on a different podcast about how they went about that competition. And you can imagine, there's plenty of people in the US looking at it. There's plenty of people with excellent domain expertise and knowledge about the NFL. And it was funny, these two guys were talking about how they knew nothing about the NFL. The first thing they did was try and read some information about the rules and how it works. And the problem they were trying to solve, they said they were looking at something they'd done previously, and I think it was biology or some other science field, and they took one of the principles from that and applied it to this competition. They ended up winning. So I think, if not, and obviously it's not a betting market, we're not talking about winning money long term at betting, but just so when it comes to sports, I think there's plenty of experts in other areas, in other fields, that may enter the space and make it far more difficult for those that aren't doing those types of things with those types of tools. So do you think that's something that, moving forward with all the tools that you've talked about, all the things that you've done in your past, and then jumping into betting, there are many people out there that would have a very strong resume and maybe can build up their own acumen to be more involved in this space?
Definitely. I mean, when there's money on the line, you have people from everywhere just flooding in, and these crossovers between different areas of science, for example, biology or physics, and that come into to solve problems in mathematics or statistics, it happens all the time. Brownian motion, a concept used to model stock prices, that comes from physics, from thermodynamics, how particles move around in a random fashion. So, it just takes a couple of guys to realize that movement can be applied into finance, and then you have the whole explosion of market options and the Black-Scholes differential equation, and it just opened a whole new level of hedge funds. It happens all the time, and I think it's important to look into those different areas more than to learn the technicalities of it. You learn the concepts and how you can adapt them to your football betting. Try to see things in a different light. You'll see what you just talked about. Some people that have absolutely nothing to do with NFL, but they have this crossover into football betting or NFL. The data looks similar. They apply their algorithms, and next thing you know, they win this competition. So it happens all the time, and it's exciting. It's different. So I'm looking forward to that.
So one final question for you. You mentioned you read a lot of literature, or you looked at academic articles, or went through journals and things like that. Were you reading, the hot hand fallacy and some specific sports-related analytics things, or were you going more broadly? And within that, does anything stand out that you would suggest or have suggested to others that's worthwhile spending the time to read through?
The modeling of how a lot of what my models are based on is just the Mayer papers. He started modeling using, regression techniques, using the Poisson distribution, followed up by Dixon Coles, who makes a little correction. And then after that, there's tons of papers, and each one of them has, even though some of them get very technical, they always have a a summary or a review or a conclusion where they explain their findings and their thoughts. And even by just reading that, you can get a lot of insight into how they were thinking, into, small little ideas that you can apply. And and all that's available on the internet. And there's always new papers coming out. Just recently, I added this Twitter handle that posts on new statistic papers that get published in Arvix, which is it's this repository for mathematical statistics, physics papers. And it never hurts to just click on them, read over it, skip over all the mathematical jargon. Sometimes that just goes right over my head. But then you read the conclusions and you can say, hey, I can adapt that to my betting. So yeah, definitely. The other fallacies and the gambling fallacies, those are also very interesting. It's very fun to work them out in math and in probability. When you write them out and prove why they're fallacies or why this does not work. For example, a martingale or a gambler's ruin. You also learn a lot about probability, and it might interest some people to jump into math. So yeah, I've definitely read all of those, and it's crazy. It's a world out there. I think humans have a hard time with probability, with statistics. It's just counterintuitive, So yeah, definitely read those and remember those.
Yeah, absolutely. One final point. Can you just mention your Twitter handle, the website, and also I'm curious, your subscribers or those that value what you do, tell me what it is about or what you think it is about the website so that those listening who might feel the same way can take a look.
Sure. So my Twitter handle is poison_foot. I didn't manage to grab the whole poison foot handle, but yeah, poison_foot. You can find me there. I'm always open to DMs. The website's poisonfoot.com. And basically, I try to make a website similar to a website that would look to the FX markets. No clutter. You go into the website, the list of matches is there. You click, the information's right there. I try to balance between the public and the subscriber information to hopefully appease everybody. Some people are not looking for models; they just want descriptive statistics. I'll give you those, but I'll give it to you in a nicer chart, nicer bar graph, and yeah, just a blog section where I try to write about math issues and So anyone looking for some a site that has a model and that quantifies things, gives you a price. You can just feel free to visit the website and see if you like it. And if you have any questions, DM me, and I would have no problem explaining to you the different aspects of the site.
Amazing. John, thank you very much for your time. It's been a pleasure chatting, and thanks for coming on the podcast.
No, thank you, Jake. Thank you. It's a privilege being here.